Hillary Clinton delivered a speech today on her strategy for fighting ISIS and dealing with the ongoing conflict in Syria. Here's an excerpt.
Let me start with the campaign to defeat ISIS across the region. The United States and our international coalition has been conducting this fight for more than a year. It's time to begin a new phase and intensify and broaden our efforts to smash the would-be caliphate and deny ISIS control of territory in Iraq and Syria. That starts with a more effective coalition air campaign, with more allied planes, more strikes, and a broader target set. We need an immediate intelligence surge in the region. A more effective coalition air campaign is necessary, but not sufficient. And we should be honest about the fact that to be successful, airstrikes will have to be combined with ground forces actually taking back more territory from ISIS. Like President Obama, I do not believe that we should again have 100,000 American troops in combat in the Middle East.
We have more sections of her speech, the different strategies that she wants to pursue in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. We're going to talk about all of those. What did you think about that, the preview that there will be more airstrikes? There's talk of troops on the ground, not American troops, we swear, not American troops, but that boots on the ground will be necessary.
Yeah. So, mixed feelings. Not all of it is wrong, a lot of it is right. So, do I want an intelligence surge? Yeah, I'd like to surge our intelligence a lot, right? So, to me, money spent on intelligence, you almost can't do enough of that, right? So the more intelligence we have, the better we would be at preventing these type of attacks, because the guy who planned the attacks, who we just got in Europe, and I was going to say captured, but killed him thoroughly, right, was in Syria. If we had better intelligence, maybe we would have known when he was coming back, what his plans were up to, right? So you can't give me enough intelligence. And one, to find out information, two, to prevent attacks, three, to know where the bad guys are so we can target better. Now, the part I totally disagree with is broader airstrikes. Now, what does that mean? That's the language that she used. So we go broader. Wait, if you know the targets, let's go hit the targets. If you want to hit beyond the targets, well, that's dumb. That's going to create more enemies, let alone killing civilians, which is immoral and kind of what they do, right? So you got to get in the weeds there to tell me what you mean by broader airstrikes. I mean, do we know of specific ISIS leadership targets that we're not hitting?
Yeah, she's acting.
Then we should hit those. We should hit those.
It's like, okay, so we got some targets. We have 7 bombs today. Let's choose.
We've got plenty of bombs. We've got plenty of bombs. That's not the issue.
We have billions of dollars going into the bombing.
If you have actionable intelligence, okay, right? If you don't have actionable intelligence and you'd like to do broader airstrikes, that's a miserable idea and counterproductive, right? And then finally, the ground forces, again, devil's in the details there. You know what I've said over and over since the Paris strikes, and I've said it before, I'm a big believer in special forces. You want to swoop in against a targeted, to do a targeted operation based on great intelligence that we have, or good intelligence that we have. I'm on your side. That makes sense to me. If you want to send in ground forces and sit there and try to occupy Syria or Iraq, that's mental. So you got to use judgment to figure out, hey, what do we mean by ground forces?
Yeah. And so we're gonna jump to some of these other sections. She seems to be, like, you can read her entire speech. It's like 8 pages. I read the entire thing. It was very long. But she was saying that we have these special forces. We have people working in the region with the local forces, but we need to up what they're capable of doing while they're out there. They should be calling in airstrikes while they're out there with the local forces. And that sounds reasonable to me, but it also it reminds me of the draw up in forces for Vietnam. Like, we send in the advisors, and then maybe they start advising on, oh no, point your rifle this way, and then they take the rifle and they start pointing it. It sounds like this is how you get more ground troops into Syria.
That's such a fair point, but I'm in a unique position here where I'm not going to have a lot of backers, but I believe that part of that strategy is right. Okay, I do believe in using force on targeted strikes on great intelligence. Okay, and like I just said a second ago, sometimes good intelligence. Okay, and now that doesn't mean that broad drone strikes, broad bombing makes sense, as I explained. But you're right; it's easy to get sucked in.
Yeah,
that's why we need to elect someone who we trust in, to not make that mistake, right? Is
Hillary
Hillary
Clinton.
that person? I honestly don't know,
I don't
right?
know.
I know that on the right, we're not going to have that person. They're not even going to talk about not making that mistake. They don't think it's a mistake,
Yeah.
right? They just bring in the ground forces.
Just go crazy, yeah.
Right.
Jeb says ground forces.
If a Bernie Sanders type of politician, Elizabeth Warren, someone who's solidly progressive and has proven it their whole lives, said to me, I'm going to use special forces in exactly the way that Hillary Clinton is describing, but I'm going to end it right there.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe that is the right strategy, and I would trust them to do that strategy. To be fair to President Obama, he has not sent in large ground forces to Libya or to Syria or back into Iraq. So perhaps he's a guy you could trust to do a strategic strike without broadening.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
I want to get to some of the other points because I think she does have a couple of other good aspects to her strategy. She says, we've learned that we can score victories over terrorist leaders and networks only to face metastasizing threats down the road. So we also have to play and win the long game. We should pursue a comprehensive counterterrorism strategy, one that embeds our mission against ISIS within a broader struggle against radical jihadism that is bigger than any one group, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS or some other network. She talks repeatedly about having to win the military battle. You have to win the online battle against the recruitment and the war of ideas against radical jihadism, which I think we can all agree with. She says that we need to lay the foundation for a second Sunni awakening. We need to put sustained pressure on the government in Baghdad to get its political house in order, move forward with national reconciliation, and finally stand up a National Guard. So there she's obviously shifting to Iraq. The fear that I think that's in the back of my mind is when she says our strategy cannot win without ground troops, but I don't want them to be our troops, so we're going to put pressure on the locals to do it. As if Obama hasn't been trying to get the locals to do it.
Yeah.
So then you face a conundrum. So if what's been going on for a year or two continues and the local troops don't step in, but you've already said we can't win without ground troops, and you seem dead set on us winning, it seems like at some point the dam breaks and we have to fill the void. That's my fear.
No, those are great points. So the idea that somehow there's going to be an awakening again in
Maybe
Iraq,
there will be,
right?
But
and somehow they're going to be a country, and they're going to stick together, and and the billions of dollars we wasted in training their troops is going to work if we do it again. Now that's nonsense. Using it as an excuse for ground forces, our ground forces, is nonsense. So, but you have to have a good long-term strategy. Part of our answer is right. War of ideas against radical Islam, right? Mm-hmm. So that I get into the culture wars that I agree with. And not in the right-wing way where you say I'm against all Muslims and the idea of Islam overall. That's not a smart way of doing that culture war. Okay, the smart way is to attack radicalism, fundamentalism, right?
Yeah.
So that you don't alienate the people on the ground. Because if you go in the middle of Iraq and Syria and go, I hate Islam, that's not going to work. No. That's about the dumbest strategy you could have, right?
Surprisingly popular on the internet.
Yeah, because those internet warriors, they've got strategy figured out. But that requires actual dollars spent, right? Whether it's in education, it's in improving Wi-Fi in areas so they have access to outside ideas through the internet, right? Yeah. You've got to actually spend the money on that infrastructure. That's not like loosey-goosey, foreign aid. Yeah. No, that's so that we could win the war of ideas. Don't please be long-sighted here, not short-sighted. Okay, now, in terms of long-term strategy on the ground, Iraq has never been Iraq. I've been saying this literally for a decade now. It's Shia, Sunni, and Kurdish areas. So the more you try to keep it together, the more unnatural it is, the more that it bursts out in this way. So can we please have a strategy that recognizes the obvious facts on the ground? If you keep trying to get Shia in southern Iraq to defend the Sunnis in middle Iraq, it's never going to work. You could spend $1 trillion training Iraqi soldiers and army to do that, and they're not going to do it because they don't empathize with the Sunnis in the middle, and they don't know anything about the Kurds in the north and don't give a damn about them, and they're never going to defend them. So let's be smart about what the reality on the ground is.
A couple other quick areas from her speech. She says, this is in regards to Syria, we need to move simultaneously towards a political solution to the civil war that paves the way for a new government with new leadership and to encourage more Syrians to take on ISIS as well. And she sort of responded to some questions about how Russia would feel about that. And it didn't seem clear to me that she had a good answer to those questions. But jumping ahead to 10A, This is something that on Syria, I think maybe she can draw some Republican voters over to her, because in the last Republican debate, we heard pretty much this over and over again. I believe that the no-fly zone is merited and can be implemented, again, in a coalition, not an American-only no-fly zone. It will try to clear the air of the bombing attacks that are still being carried out to a limited extent by the Syrian military, now supplemented by the Russian Air Force, which I would say begs the question, so then how do you stop the Russian Air Force from violating the no-fly zone? But in response to a question, is this a no-fly zone across all of Syria, or is it a more limited one? She said that it would be generally towards the borders, an area for near the borders with Turkey, an area for the refugees to exist without the fear of the barrel bombs and things like that that the Assad regime have been using against them.
Yeah, look, she's trying to thread the needle both in policy and in politics. Hey, don't worry, I'll be much tougher than Obama, but liberals, don't worry, I'm not going to be Bush, and I'm not going to send in
100,000 ground troops.
Right. And so, does anyone know what Hillary Clinton's actually going to do? I don't know, right? And so, if she did this exact policy, I would agree and disagree in parts. Maybe I could live with it, and certainly better than the Republican alternative. Am I convinced she's actually going to do this policy? No. Am I convinced that she's going to do a more liberal version of this policy or a more conservative version of this policy? I don't know.